my name is Michael Carter. Ever since my wife, Emma, passed away 5 years ago, I've had only one reason to keep going. My son, Daniel. He's everything to me, the light that keeps me strong even when life feels unbearably heavy. That morning, sunlight poured through the curtains of our small house on the outskirts of town. I was busy in the kitchen, making a simple breakfast. Toast, scrambled eggs, and a glass of milk. Not fancy, but I always tried to make sure Daniel left for school with a full stomach. Daniel, come on down. Breakfast is ready, I called, pouring milk into a glass. Soon enough, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Daniel appeared in his neat school uniform. I always admired how he was growing up taller, more like his mom every day. "Morning, Dad," he said quietly as he pulled out a chair. "Morning, buddy," I replied with a smile. I sat across from him, watching him eat. There's a special kind of joy in seeing him healthy and happy. Inside, I always pray Daniel can reach his dreams. He's smart, sharp, and full of drive. I want to be a dad who supports him no matter what, even if our life is simple. "Dad, don't forget, there's a parent-teacher meeting today," he said, glancing at me briefly before returning to his plate. I nodded. "Of course, I'll be there. I never want to miss anything important about you, buddy." He just murmured softly in response. I didn't think too much of it. What mattered to me was simply being there for him. The day felt calm, like any other. I had no idea that beneath this quiet, a storm was brewing, one that would slowly chip away at the little happiness I had fought so hard to protect. Later that day, I headed to Daniel's school for the parent-teacher meeting. He wore my old, slightly faded shirt. My shoes weren't new either, but still decent enough. I walked into the auditorium, feeling proud that I could be here for my son. In the auditorium, parents sat neatly. Many were dressed in elegant suits and dresses. Ik knew primera didn't look like them, but I tried not to care. What mattered most was Daniel. I waved when I spotted him standing with his friends. My smile grew, hoping he'd smile back, but instead, Daniel quickly turned away, as if he didn't recognize me. I froze. Maybe he didn't see me, I tried to reassure myself. But when one of his friends pointed in my direction and asked him, Daniel shook his head slightly and muttered with a stiff face that, "Isn't anyone—" My chest tightened instantly. Those words hit me like a cold slap to the face. I wanted to go to him, to hug him, but my legs felt heavy. For the first time, I felt something unfamiliar, a small crack forming in the bond we had. I could only sit in the back row, forcing a smile while my heart slowly sank. I didn't know what to do, but since that day, the shadow of Daniel rejecting my presence haunted me. After school, I tried to act normal. I made a simple dinner, chicken soup and boiled potatoes. Usually, Daniel would tell me about his day at the table, but that night was different. He sat quietly, playing with a spoon, avoiding my eyes. "How was the meeting? Did you like that I came?" I asked softly, trying to start a conversation. He paused for a moment. His eyes darted around. Then he just nodded briefly, saying nothing. The smile that used to light up his face was gone. I smiled weakly, though inside it hurt more than I could say. "Daniel, if something's bothering you, you can always tell Dad. Whatever it is, I'll listen," I said. He lowered his head even further, avoiding my gaze. "Nothing's wrong, Dad. I'm just tired," he said flatly. It sounded simple, but somehow it stabbed straight through me. I missed his smile, his jokes, even his little tantrums. Now, all that remained was the silence at our dinner table. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Memories of Daniel's childhood came flooding back. His laughter when I carried him in the park, the way he hugged me when he was scared to sleep alone, the proud way he used to call out for me. I wondered, when did that smile disappear? And could I ever get it back? The next morning, I decided to leave for work early, thinking maybe I could drive Daniel to school. A small moment like that might help me get closer to him again. "Daniel, come on, let's go." "Dad's ready," I said cheerfully, starting up the old car my grandfather had left me. But Daniel stood at the door, hesitant. "Dad, it's okay. I'm going with my friends. They'll pick me up down the street. I tried to smile through the sting. Oh, all right. Just be careful, okay? He just nodded and ran off. From the window, I watched him get into his friend's car. They laughed and joked while I stood alone on the driveway. The distance between us felt real on, invisible gap that seemed to grow wider every day. At work in the shop, my hands were busy fixing engines, but my mind kept drifting. Was I enough for Daniel? Did my simple life embarrass him? That evening, when he came home, I tried again. How about we go fishing this weekend? Like old times? I suggested hopefully. Daniel glanced at me and said softly, I've got plans with my friends. Maybe another time. My heart sank again. I forced a smile, though inside it shattered. I realized something was changing between us. Something I couldn't ignore anymore. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The lights were dim, only the TV casting a faint glow. Daniel was in his room, door closed. No laughter, no warm conversation, just the silence between us. I looked at an old photo on the table. The three of us together, Emma smiling, holding little Daniel laughing, while I stood beside them with pride. Tears threatened to fall, but I held them back. I promised myself to stay strong. Yet one question echoed in my heart. Have I become a disappointment to my son? The next day, I got to school early to pick him up, hoping to show him I was always there. But when he came out with his friends, I saw the nervous look in his eyes. Duh, he said softly, as if surprised. Yeah, buddy. Let's go home, I replied with a wide smile, trying to hide my unease. But I saw how he glanced at his friends, then lowered his head. One of them asked, Who's that? Daniel hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice I could hear perfectly, said, It's nobody. Just some guy who walks by here a lot. The world seemed to stop. That sentence cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. I stood frozen. My smile vanished. His friends laughed and moved on. Daniel walked slowly to me, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. Let's go home, he said, as if what he just said hadn't happened. I could only nod, my throat tight. The car ride home felt empty, no music, no chatter, just the old engine humming beneath the weight of our distance. At home, Daniel rushed to his room. I sat in the living room, staring at his closed door. Disappointment and heartbreak twisted together inside me. That night, I whispered to myself, am I really nobody to him? For the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Days went on. I tried different approaches. I stopped forcing gifts or sweet words. Instead, I stayed close, quietly, hoping to wait for the right moment to talk, or at least to make him feel safe with me. One afternoon, I waited at the park near his school. From a distance, I saw Daniel laughing with his friends. My heart ached, seeing him so happy without me. I wanted to call his name, to step forward, but something held me back. I sat on a bench, watching him, hoping one day he would notice that I had always been here. But when one of his friends pointed toward me, Daniel ducked his head, hiding behind his hair, as if trying to erase me from the world. My silence, meant to bring us closer, seemed only to hurt him more. I felt like a ghost in my own son's life. On the way home, I looked at my faithful old car. I'll always be here, buddy. Even if you don't want to see me, I whispered. That night, I wrote in my small journal. Sometimes loving someone means letting them be happy, even if it means standing in the shadows. And I knew this long journey had only just begun. A few days later, the school held a small gathering to showcase the students' projects. I made a point to arrive early, hoping to catch a glimpse of Daniel in action and maybe, just quietly, show a bit of support. When Daniel stepped onto the stage, I smiled proudly from across the room. He looked confident, cheerful, and sharp as always. But then, one of his friends whispered loudly, Hey, look, that's your dad, who's always around. So cool, huh? Daniel froze for a moment. Then, in a voice half hiding his embarrassment, he said in front of his friends, He's nobody. Just leave him alone. Dad. I sat frozen in the back row, the pain hitting me like a storm. Those words were indeed just a rejection of my presence day. Felt like a dismissal of all the love and effort I'd poured into him without ever asking for anything in return. After the presentation, Daniel bolted out with his friends without even glancing back. I stood at the doorway, fighting back the urge to call out. Deep down, though, I felt the crack between us growing even wider. When I got home, I sat alone at the dinner table. That night, only the quiet and the ticking of the clock kept me company. I looked at a photo of the three of us on the wall, trying to remember little Daniel's smile, the one that used to make the world feel warm. I whispered softly, "Will I always be a stranger to you, buddy?" For the first time, I started to wonder if my efforts to get closer were enough, or if I'd already lost my son forever. The following days, I tried to find another way, a way that wouldn't embarrass Daniel but would let him feel my presence. I started leaving little notes on his desk, short messages on his bedroom wall, or small tweaks to his favorite meals. One afternoon, I baked his favorite chocolate cake and placed it on the table. Next to it, I left a small note. "Dad is always here for you, buddy. No conditions, no judgments." When Daniel came home, he paused at the cake. His eyes flicked to the note. 10 back to me, showing a mix of confusion, hesitation, and a touch of being moved. But he didn't say anything. He just took the cake and went to his room. My heart was a mix of hope and pain. He was still closed off, but there was a tiny glimmer of connection. I sat in the living room, staring at our quiet house. I realized that reaching his heart would require more patience than I had ever imagined. I whispered to myself, "Michael, you can't give up. He may push you away now, but there's still a trace of love in there." That night, I wrote in my journal, "A father es love isn't," about being seen by the world es, about being in your child's heart, even from the shadows. And I resolved to try again tomorrow, more carefully, and closer, even if unseen. The next day, I stayed around Daniel's school again, but this time I sat on a bench, farther away. I watched from a distance, hoping for even the smallest sign that my efforts were being noticed. During recess, I saw Daniel sitting alone on a quieter bench. Usually, he was surrounded by friends, but today, he looked down at a book. My heart fluttered. Maybe this was the moment. I approached slowly, keeping my distance. I just looked at him, giving a small, meaningful smile. Daniel glanced up briefly. Our eyes met, and he held my gaze a little longer before looking down again. Just a few seconds, but to me, it felt like a small victory. A heart that had been closed was starting to crack. When I got home, I wrote in my journal again. Today, no matter how small, I saw him. I saw my son. That's enough to give hope. That night, I gazed at the sky from the living room window. Even with the lingering pain and disappointment, there was a sliver of light reminding me. This journey isn't over, and a father's love always finds its way, slowly and through obstacles. The next day, I decided to take a bolder step. Instead of just watching from afar, I joined a small school activity on the playground. I knew Daniel usually participated actively, so I hoped my presence wouldn't be intrusive, just close enough for him to feel I was nearby. While Daniel worked on a group project, I stood at the edge of the field, smiling faintly. I watched him carefully, subtly clearing small obstacles that might trouble him without him ever noticing. Suddenly, a teacher looked at me and smiled. "Michael, thanks for helping. The kids must appreciate having an adult who cares," she said. He just nodded, keeping my focus on Daniel. For a few moments, I caught him looking my way. His eyes lingered for a heartbeat. This time, he didn't look away. That fleeting moment felt eternal. My heart raced, but I stayed patient, not stepping too close too soon. When the activity ended, Daniel walked past me. He glanced at me again and quietly said, "Thanks, Dad." Just 2 words, but to me, they were like rain on a desert, bringing life back to something that had almost dried up in our hearts. That night, I wrote in my journal, "No matter how small, any acknowledgement from my son is proof that a father's love still has a place in his heart. I won't give up." I smiled faintly, realizing the door to his heart was slowly opening. A few days after the school event, Daniel seemed lighter in mood. He no longer avoided my greetings or presence. Though he was still a bit awkward, I felt a small relief, believing that our path was gradually improving. But everything changed one afternoon. Daniel came home from school looking gloomy, his steps heavy, his eyes full of unease. I immediately knew something was wrong. "Daniel, what happened?" "Trouble at school?" I asked, trying to sound calm. He lowered his head, voice barely audible. "Dad." They were laughing at me again. "About you," they said. "I'm stupid for having a dad like you." My chest tightened. Those words felt like a knife, but I held myself together. "It's okay, buddy. You know Dad is proud of you, right?" I said softly. He shook his head. I don't want to go to school tomorrow. I'm embarrassed, Dad. Really embarrassed." I realized then that it wasn't Tejas' shame. He felt the pressure from his friends could crush the tiny courage he'd just begun to find. I sat beside him, holding his hand gently. "Daniel, I get it. This is hard, but you're not alone. Dad's always here, and we'll get through this together." He looked at me briefly, then down again. I knew our journey was far from over, and this major conflict had just begun. That night I wrote in my journal, "Sometimes a father's love has to endure the ridicule of the world just to see his child stand tall." I knew I had to be stronger than ever now. The next day, I arrived at school early, determined to meet with Daniel's teacher and figure out a way to make him feel safe. I wanted a solution without adding to his embarrassment. In the teacher's lounge, I met Mr. Brown, Daniel's counselor, a wise and patient man. I told him what had happened yesterday, my voice trembling but firm. "Mr. Brown, I don't want to push Daniel, but I'm afraid he's pulling away. I want to help him keep his confidence." Mr. Brown looked at me seriously. "Michael, you're doing the right thing, but you have to understand, Daniel is at a stage where peer pressure is overwhelming. You can't fix it alone. You need patience and to model courage and resilience." I nodded, taking it all in. Stepping out of the lounge, I realized this first challenge was heavier than I imagined. Not just proving my love, but protecting my son's dignity among his peers. On the way home, I saw Daniel waiting at the school gate, his face still glum. I walked up slowly. "Hey, buddy. How was your day?" I asked gently. He looked down, then quietly said, "Dad, I don't want anyone at school to know I have a dad like you. Please, don't get involved." My heart broke, but I swallowed the pain. I knew this was the first obstacle, facing direct rejection from my own son while staying strong and patient. That night, I wrote in my journal again, "A father's love is sometimes tested not by the world, but by his child's own fears. I must stay, even if he rejects me." I took a deep breath, preparing myself for a longer, harder fight. The next day, I tried a new approach. I couldn't force myself into school, so I prepared a small surprise at home, something that might make Daniel smile without embarrassing him. I bought a comic book he had been eyeing for weeks and left it on the living room table with a short note. "For Daniel, hope this brightens your day a little. Dad's always here." When Daniel came home, I watched from the kitchen. At first, he hesitated, staring at the book. His eyes widened when he read my note. He smiled for a brief moment, then quickly looked down, hiding it. I smiled faintly, relieved, though the relief vanished when he looked at me seriously. "Dad, don't think I needed this. I don't want anyone to know you gave this to me. Please." "Don't embarrass me again," he said softly, but the words cut deeper than before. My heart felt like it stopped. The small surprise that should have been a bridge became a reminder of how fragile his trust in me still was. I could only lower my head, hold back the heartbreak, and whisper, "All right, buddy." "I'd understand. Nothing will embarrass you. I just want you to know I'm always here." That night, I sat by the living room window, looking at the stars. Every small step toward my son seemed fraught with the risk of rejection, but I knew I couldn't give up. I whispered to myself, "This journey is just beginning, but I'll keep walking to see a smile again." The next day, I decided to plan a more thoughtful strategy. I knew spontaneous gestures weren't always effective. I had to be patient, careful, and respectful of Daniel's feelings. I started with small things. Making his favorite breakfast, leaving little notes in his room, occasionally putting his favorite snacks in his school bag, all done without him realizing it was from his dad. But the more careful I was, the more complicated it got. One afternoon, while preparing a snack, there was a knock at the door. Daniel entered with his friends, and one of them quietly asked, is this your dad who always interferes at school? Daniel looked at me nervously, lowered his head, and said quickly, Dad, don't bother, okay? My heart felt like it stopped. The strategy I'd so carefully planned suddenly felt fragile. My son was still scared, embarrassed, and shaken by peer pressure. I swallowed the pain, smiled, and whispered, "It's okay, buddy. Dad just wants you to know I am always here, whenever you need me." Daniel lowered his head again. Until he left, I stood at the door, holding the handle, frustrated and broken. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Loving a child sometimes means walking the thin line between courage and pain. Every small step carries risk, but I can't retreat." I took a deep breath, bracing myself for tomorrow. I knew this journey would get harder, and I had to find a way through the wall Daniel had built around his heart. That evening, I decided to try a more emotional approach. I prepared a special dinner, simple, but made with effort. His favorite spaghetti with homemade tomato sauce. I set the table in the dining room, turned on soft lighting, and left a small note. "Tonight, Dad hopes we can eat together. I want to hear your stories, buddy." When Daniel came home, he hesitated at the sight. His eyes widened, then looked down. I held my breath, hoping he would sit and enjoy the moment without feeling forced. He slowly sat down, looking at the food, and I tried to smile. "Dad, don't know what to say," he said softly. I placed my hand gently on the table. "You don't have to say anything, buddy. I just want you to know I'm glad we're having dinner together." A few minutes of silence felt endless. I studied his face, hoping for a small sign that his heart was beginning to soften. Slowly, Daniel lifted the corner of his mouth, like a tiny smile. Just a fleeting moment, but to me it was like a beam of light piercing the darkness. I held back tears, careful not to make him uncomfortable. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Sometimes, to reach a closed heart, we have to put ourselves in vulnerable places, but true love is always worth fighting for." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of real hope. The next morning, I noticed small changes in Daniel. At breakfast, he glanced at me, this time not looking away. His heart seemed restless, caught between embarrassment and longing for his dad. I could sense the internal struggle in every gesture. I tried a light-hearted suggestion. "Daniel, tomorrow we could go to the park for a bit, like old times, just the two of us." He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head gently. "Dad, I'm not sure my friends won't see. I'm embarrassed." My heart ached, but I tried to hold back the pain. I sat beside him, resting my hand on his shoulder. "I understand, buddy. It's okay to feel embarrassed. The important thing is, Dad is always here for you, even if you don't want to be seen with me." He lowered his head and let out a long breath. Slowly, I saw the faintest hint of a smile on his lips, a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. The moment left me with mixed emotions. Relief that there was a crack in his wall. Sadness that embarrassment still kept us apart. That night, I wrote in my journal, "A father's love is often tested by his child's shame, but every tiny smile is a victory worth fighting for." And I realized this journey was only halfway through. Many obstacles still lay ahead, but I knew, as long as I didn't give up, there was a chance to rebuild our bond. The next day, new tests came from the outside world. When I went to pick Daniel up from school, a few of his close friends were hanging out by the gate, laughing and joking while staring at me. I could feel the tension rising and Daniel's anxious gaze. One of his friends, in a teasing tone, said, "Hey, look, your dad's here again, Daniel." Embarrassing, huh? Daniel ducked his head quickly, his face turning red. He gripped his backpack tightly, like he wanted to disappear right there. I wanted to get mad, to defend myself, but I held back. I knew that getting angry now would only make him feel worse. Primeta looked down, then gently at him, and said softly, "It's okay, buddy. Dad's here for you. Don't worry about what they say." Daniel just nodded, but his eyes were still wet and restless. My chest ached, seeing him stuck between feeling embarrassed and wanting to be close to me. The whole ride home, I tried to stay strong. I knew the outside world would keep testing our relationship. Every taunt from his friends could slowly chip away at the trust we were just starting to build. That night, I wrote in my journal, "A father S, love isn't only tested by a child S. Rejection at S tested by the world around them too. I have to be more patient, stronger, and stay by his side, even if my heart breaks." I stared at the stars from the living room window, determined not to back down. This journey is tough, but I knew that if I held on, one day Daniel would truly feel my love without shame. The next day, I decided to try a creative approach. I wanted Daniel to face his friends teasing with more confidence, without feeling pressured by my presence. I came up with a simple plan. A symbolic gift of friendship bracelet gust for Daniel, with a small note reinforcing courage and self-confidence. I placed the bracelet on his desk before he got home, along with a note. "For my boy, so you always remember, courage lives in your heart. Dad always believes in you." When Daniel got home, he saw the bracelet and looked at me with questioning eyes. I smiled softly and said, "You don't have to wear it in front of your friends. Just for you, buddy. Dad knows you're strong." He lifted the bracelet, stared at it for a moment, then tucked it into his pocket. I saw a flicker of pride in his eyes, even as he looked away quickly. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Every small step I take, even if unseen by the world, grows courage in my son's heart. I have to keep being creative, patient, and full of love." I smiled faintly, feeling a little relief. For the first time, I could see that even when the world presses down on him, something is growing in Daniel's heart, a confidence tied to my love. But the calm didn't last long. A few days later, the pressure from his friends increased. When I picked Daniel up from school, a group of kids was gathered by the gate, mocking every step we took. One of them shouted, "Hey, Daniel! Look, your dad's here again. Still need a ride." Daniel ducked his head, his face red, gripping his backpack tightly. My heart ached, but I stayed calm. I looked at him gently and said, "It's okay, buddy. Dad's here for you. Don't worry about them." He glanced at me for a moment, then hurried past them, ducking his head and holding back tears. I could feel the tension wrapping around him. On the ride home, I reflected. My effort to rebuild Daniel's trust had to face the test of the outside world, not just his own embarrassment. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Every small step can be tested by the world, but I won't give up. My son will learn that courage and love are always with him, even when he's embarrassed and the world pushes him down." I stared at the stars from the living room window, determined to find a way to help Daniel feel confident without feeling pressured by his friends. The next day, I started planning a more thoughtful strategy. I wanted Daniel to face the teasing without losing self-confidence and without feeling ashamed of my presence. I decided to involve his teacher and a few supportive friends, creating an environment where he could feel safe. I met with Mrs. Parker, Daniel's homeroom teacher, and explained the situation. "Mrs. Parker, I don't want Daniel to feel pressured. Could you help him face his friends, little by little, without embarrassing him?" I asked. Mrs. Parker smiled, patted my shoulder, and said, "Michael, you've been incredibly patient. I'll help you, and I will make Daniel feel safe and strong." I smiled, relieved. Together with Mrs. Parker, we planned small group activities at school where Daniel could showcase his skills and creativity without the pressure from teasing classmates. On the way home, I noticed Daniel glancing at me briefly from his bedroom window. There was a hint of curiosity in his eyes. I smiled faintly, realizing that slowly, this strategy might actually work. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Sometimes, helping a child find confidence means working with others, facing the world outside, and staying patiently by their side. Every small step is a victory." I looked at the night sky, convinced that the next steps would determine whether the walls around Daniel's heart would continue to crack, opening the way for a closer relationship. A few hours later, I noticed a small change that made my heart race. Daniel was sitting in the living room, holding the letter I'd given him. He read it over and over, rarely looking at me, but there was something different in his eyes, not fear anymore, but hesitation and curiosity. I sat on the sofa nearby, keeping my distance. I just gave a faint smile, letting him be with his feelings. After a while, he looked up at me with eyes that were wet but full of meaning. "Dad, I don't know what to say," he said softly, his voice shaking. I shook my head, holding back tears. "You don't have to say anything, buddy. I just want you to know Dad's always here for you, no matter what." He looked down again, clutching the letter tightly. Slowly, I saw cracks forming in the wall around his heart. He didn't say much, but I could feel the warmth starting to emerge between us. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Sometimes, a child doesn't need long words to feel love. Small, subtle signs are enough to open a heart that's been closed for so long." Today, a new light began to shine in him. I took a deep breath, feeling relieved but still cautious. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt that this last step was starting to show real results. The next day, the atmosphere at home felt different. Daniel seemed calmer, sitting in the living room, doing his homework. I approached slowly, sat down in the chair next to him without saying a word. We just sat together in silence, but the warmth was real. After a few minutes, he glanced at me and said, "Dad, thanks for being patient. I'm trying to understand." I gave a faint smile and rested my hand on his shoulder for a moment. "Of course, buddy. I know this isn't easy, but I'm glad you're willing to try." He gave a small, hesitant, but genuine smile. That smile was like a tiny light piercing the darkness that had long covered his heart. I felt both relief and emotion, because for the first time, Daniel was opening up, bit by bit. Without the usual fear, that night, I wrote in my journal, "Sometimes warmth is born from patience and the courage to stay." Today, my son's smile was the most beautiful reward of all this struggle. I looked at the night sky from the window, feeling a new sense of hope. The journey was still long, but now there was a bridge beginning to form between us, fragile but real. A few days later, that bridge was tested. While Daniel was at school, an old friend who liked to tease him showed up again. This time, the teasing was subtle, but still pressing. "Daniel, looks like your dad's always involved, huh?" Kinda embarrassing, don't you think? Daniel ducked his head, his face red, and I could feel the tension rising. My heart broke seeing him face that pressure alone. But I realized this was an important test. Was the little light growing in his heart strong enough to face the outside world? When he came home, Daniel looked glum. I prepared his favorite dinner, but didn't push him to talk. I just set the food on the table and smiled softly, giving him space to process. After a moment, he looked at me, voice quiet but firm. "Dad, I'm trying. I don't want my friends to mess with how we feel." My heart swelled with a mix of pride, relief, and emotion. He was still shy, but now he was starting to choose courage, slowly but surely. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Every challenge is an opportunity for my son to learn bravery." Today, he showed a strength of heart I hadn't seen before. The struggle isn't over, but the light is getting brighter. I looked at the stars from the window, certain that our journey to Daniel's heart had reached a critical point. All efforts would be tested before bringing bigger results. A few days later, everything seemed to collapse. Daniel came home from school, dragging his feet, his face gloomy, his usually bright eyes now clouded with heavy embarrassment. His friends had started teasing him again, more openly this time, and the words cut deep. I felt like all the efforts, I'd made little notes, long letters, subtle presents meant nothing. My heart ached, watching my son nearly give in to the crushing shame. I sat next to him holding my breath, looking into his confused and fearful eyes. "Daniel, I know this is hard. You feel like Evie failed to. Primera Saidi softly. But there's one last choice we have. Buddy, we can face this together. Or I can step back for a while so you can breathe." Daniel lowered his head, tears rolling down his cheeks. My heart nearly shattered, but I knew this was the most important moment. Whether I dared to bet fully on love and patience, or step back temporarily to protect him. I gently took his hand. Dad still wants to be with you, buddy. No pressure, just to send your courage to face the world. Silence filled the room, but I could feel his breathing start to steady. This choice, though scary, was the only path to Daniel's heart. I realized this decision would determine whether our long journey would end in happiness or regret. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Sometimes a father's love is tested at rock bottom. The hardest choice is to stay, even when everything seems to fail. Tomorrow, we will decide the future of my son's heart." The next day, I decided to execute that final choice with full courage. I walked Daniel to school, but this time, I didn't just sit in the distance. I walked beside him, as if a part of his world, without pressuring or forcing him. When his friends started teasing, I stayed silent, looking at Daniel gently, giving courage just through my gaze. At first, he hesitated, but slowly he lifted his head, looked him in the eye, and walked with more confidence. For a moment, I held my breath, afraid he'd retreat, but this time was different. Daniel gave me a faint smile, a meaningful one. He chose courage, chose me by his side, even with his friends around. After school, Daniel sat in the living room, holding my hand for a moment. "Dad, thanks for staying. Feel stronger," Isadi, softly. My heart exploded with happiness and emotion. All the struggle, notes, letters, and patience felt worth it. I felt the fragile bridge beginning to solidify, connecting our hearts without the crushing shame. That night, I wrote in my journal, "A child's courage is born from patient love." Today, we walk together toward a new light, and I know this journey has finally found its way. In the days that followed, warmth began to fill our home. Daniel now walked more confidently, occasionally glancing at me and giving a small smile. He started sharing stories about school, small but meaningful things he used to keep to himself out of embarrassment. One afternoon, while we were watching a movie together, Daniel rested his head on my shoulder. I held back tears, feeling the warmth that had long been missing. "Dad, I'm glad you're here," he sighed softly. I smiled, gently patting his shoulder. "Me too, buddy. Dad's always here, and Dad's proud of you," I replied. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Slowly but surely, the walls around my son's heart are crumbling. This warmth isn't just about words, it's about being truly present. I know we've found a new rhythm in our relationship." I gazed at the night sky, feeling at peace. The long journey wasn't completely over, but for the first time, I truly felt the closeness between my son and me, a strong foundation for the days ahead. That day, Daniel and I decided to spend the afternoon together at the park near our house. We walked side by side, joking lightly, and sometimes just enjoying the quiet of the evening. No pressure, no shame, just simple, precious togetherness. When Daniel pointed at a group of kids flying kites, he smiled and said, "Dad, I want to try that someday too." I smiled warmly and patted his shoulder. "Of course, buddy, we'll try it together. It's okay if it's hard at first. The important thing is we have fun," I replied. For hours, we played, laughed, and talked about simple things we used to think were impossible to share. My heart felt full, watching my son open up without shame, learning to enjoy the moment without fear of judgment. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Simple togetherness can sometimes be stronger than long words." Today, my son and I found a way to enjoy life together. No pressure, no shame, just real love and warmth. I looked out the living room window and gave a faint smile. Slowly but surely, our relationship was becoming more stable, warmer, and genuine. A few days later, Daniel faced a new social situation at school, a group activity requiring teamwork and interaction with his classmates. Normally, he would lower his head, avoid eye contact, or feel anxious. But this time, something was different. When it was his group's turn to present, Daniel glanced at me from afar and gave a small smile. I nodded softly in support, and he stepped forward with his head held high. In his group, Daniel spoke up, shared ideas, and even answered his classmates' questions confidently. I watched from a distance, my heart swelling with pride and emotion. He still hesitated occasionally, but now there was a real light of courage in his eyes. Minutes later, the presentation was over. Daniel walked over to me, smiling wider. "Dad, I did it. I feel stronger," he said, his voice full of certainty. I grabbed his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "See, buddy, Dad always knew you could. This is just the beginning. The world feels lighter when you believe in yourself," I said. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Confidence is born from love, patience, and small experiences that build courage." Today, my son showed he's ready to face the world with his head held high. I looked at the stars from the window, certain that our long journey was now heading toward a happy ending, where our bond was growing stronger and more genuine. In the following days, Daniel and I built a steady, warm routine together. Every morning, we had breakfast while sharing stories about little think schoolwork, funny things happening around us, and everyday life. One afternoon, we sat on the porch, reading our favorite books. Daniel would occasionally point out an interesting picture or line, and we'd discuss it lightly. No shame, no tension, just a comfortable, natural closeness. "Dad, I'm glad we can do this every day," he said, looking at me with bright eyes. I smiled warmly, patting his shoulder. "Me too, buddy. I want us to always have time like this, without rushing or pressure. This is our moment." That night, I wrote in my journal, "Warmth isn't always about big words. Sometimes, it comes from simple routines, done sincerely." Today, I felt that my son and I truly found a new rhythm in our life together. I gazed at the night sky, relieved. This long journey had brought us to a stable point. Warmth and trust were the unshakable foundation of our relationship. That day, a new social challenge came up. The school was holding an interclass sports event, and Daniel had to interact with friends who used to tease him. Normally, he would shy away or feel anxious, but this time, it was different. I kept my promise to stay by his side without pressuring him, as he was about to join his friends. Ihusa smiled, giving a small nod of encouragement. Slowly, Daniel walked onto the field, lifted his head, and faced his friends with confidence. Some of them hesitated at first, but seeing Daniel stand tall, they started to welcome him. He smiled, laughed lightly, and occasionally glanced back at me with pride. My heart swelled with emotion. My son was starting to face the outside world without the shame that used to shadow every step. On the way home, Daniel sat next to me in the car. "Dad, I'm glad you were here. It felt easier dealing with them today." A sighed warmly. I reached for his hand and smiled softly. "See, buddy, your courage grows because you know Dad. You say always. This is just the beginning, but I'm proud of you," I replied. That night, I wrote in my journal, "My son's confidence grows from consistent love and patience." Today, he began to conquer the outside world without fear, and I was right. They're supporting, not pushing. I looked out at the stars from the window, feeling at peace. This journey was getting closer to a happy ending, where our closeness had become a real, genuine strength. In the following days, our relationship began to show deeper stability. Daniel was not only more confident outside the house, but he also started sharing feelings and small stories. Every day, he no longer closed himself off near me. Instead, he felt safe and comfortable. One afternoon, we sat on the porch, enjoying warm drinks. Daniel looked at me seriously and said, "Dad, I'm glad we can talk about anything now. I feel I can just be myself." My heart warmed, almost to the point of tears. "Me too, buddy. I want you to always feel safe and comfortable, without fear of judgment. You can be whoever you want to be," I replied gently. That moment felt simple, but for us, it was a huge victory. Togetherness without pressure, trust, and genuine warmth had become part of our everyday life. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Relationship stability comes from patience, warmth, and consistent love." Today, my son and I found real comfort, a place where our hearts could grow together without fear or shame. I gazed at the night sky with relief. The happy ending now felt closer than ever, and I knew our bond had reached a strong foundation for a future filled with love. That day, Daniel and I decided to do something special, spend time together. Just the two of us. We went to our favorite park, brought a small picnic, and sat under a shady tree, enjoying the warm afternoon. Daniel looked at me and smiled. "Dad, I'm glad we can do this together. I don't want it to end," he said innocently. I smiled warmly and patted his shoulder. "Me too, buddy. Moments like this are the best gift. We can do this anytime, because Dad's always here for you." For hours, we joked, played simple games, and talked about small things that used to seem trivial. But that day felt different. Every laugh, every word, built a stronger bond, wiping away the shame that used to cloud Daniel. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Simple moments can become the foundation for a strong bond." Today, my son and I enjoy genuine togetherness, and I realized that patient, consistent love always finds its way. I looked at the stars from the window and gave a faint smile. This long journey finally felt complete. Our bond was tighter, our hearts open, and simple happiness was present in every shared moment. That day, I noticed even more changes in Daniel. The school held a more complex group activity. And this time, Daniel didn't just participate, he even led part of his group. He spoke confidently, shared ideas, and listened to his friends attentively. I stood nearby, holding back tears. The boy who used to lower his head in shame now showed maturity and confidence. He gave me a brief smile, as if to say, "See, Dad, I can do this." On the way home, Daniel looked at me with shining eyes. "Dad, I'm glad you're always here. I feel more confident now," he said sincerely. I held his hand, patting it gently. "And Dad's always proud of you. But you can face the world because you've learned to face yourself first," I replied. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Confidence is born from experience, support, and consistent love." Today, I watched my son grow into a stronger, braver, and more mature person, because of the bond we nurtured together. I gazed at the night sky with relief and happiness. This long journey was nearing its end, leaving a strong foundation, growing trust, and genuine joy in our hearts. That day, something simple yet meaningful happened. Daniel came to the living room after dinner, sat next to me and looked at me with shining eyes. "Dad, I want my friends to know you're my dad. I'm not ashamed anymore," he said softly but firmly. My heart exploded with happiness. All the effort, patience, and quiet moments of understanding had finally paid off. I took his hand, looked into his eyes, and smiled warmly. "Dad's so proud of you, buddy. You chose courage and honesty. That's the greatest gift for Dad," I said, holding back tears. We sat together for a while, just enjoying the moment. No long words were needed, just presence and sincere acknowledgement. Daniel now stood tall, full of confidence, and I knew he had overcome the shame that once blocked our bond. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Today, my son chose courage and love. There are no words more beautiful than a child's sincere acknowledgement." This long journey has finally reached its peak of happiness. I gazed at the night sky, tears of emotion in my eyes. Our struggle wasn't just about overcoming. It was about building a bond that would last forever. That day, Daniel and I decided to celebrate the happiness we had found. We went to the city park, sat on our favorite bench, and brought a small picnic. We laughed, joked, and enjoyed every moment, light and sincere. Daniel looked at me with shining eyes. "Dad, I'm glad we can celebrate like this. It feels the world isn't scary anymore," he said, smiling widely. I held his hand, patted it gently, and smiled warmly. "Dad's glad too, buddy." We made it through everything together, and now we can enjoy every moment without fear or shame, I replied. For hours, we played, shared stories, and laughed freely. Those simple moments felt priceless, more valuable than any words. I realized that this happiness was born from patience, love, and the courage to always be present for each other. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Celebrating happiness isn't about big events or fancy gifts. It's about enjoying sincere moments together, feeling the bond we've tested, and appreciating the love that's grown between us." I looked at the night sky and smiled faintly. This long journey had finally borne fruit. Our bond was stronger, trust had grown, and genuine happiness filled every shared moment. That day, I witnessed something that warmed my heart and filled me with pride. Daniel faced a situation at school that would normally make him anxious. A small conflict among classmates. Instead of avoiding it, he approached Ed, listened patiently, and offered wise advice. I watched from afar, my heart bursting with pride. The boy who used to get upset easily or lower his head in shame now showed real emotional maturity. He could calm situations without losing himself. On the way home, Daniel looked at me with shining eyes and smiled. "Dad, I feel like I can control myself better now. I don't get angry or scared so easily anymore," he said sincerely. I held his hand, patting it gently. "And Dad always believes in you, buddy. You've learned so much from everything we've been through. And now you're expressing yourself in a wise and mature way," I replied. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Emotional maturity comes from experience, patience, and consistent love." Today, I watched my son grow into a wiser, stronger, and more prepared person to face the world. I gazed at the night sky with emotion and relief. This long journey now showed tangible results. My son was not only brave enough to face the world, but also wise enough to face himself. That day, after school, Daniel and I sat on the porch enjoying the warm sunset. A gentle breeze brushed our faces, and the atmosphere was peaceful and serene. Daniel looked at me and said softly, but sincerely, "Dad, thank you for never giving up on me. I know I'm hard sometimes, but you're always here." My heart overflowed with warmth. "I'm always here, buddy. Dad believes in you, and I'm proud to see you grow into a brave and wise person," I replied, gently patting his shoulder. For a few minutes, we just sat together in comfortable silence. No long words, no arguments, just warmth and understanding grown from our long journey. That night, I wrote in my journal, "True love is born from patience and the courage to stay." Today, my son and I shared a simple but meaningful moment, realizing that our long journey has produced an unshakable bond. I looked at the stars in the night sky, smiling faintly. Our relationship was now filled with peace, warmth, and genuine love, a foundation we would cherish forever. That day, something small but meaningful happened. Daniel sat next to me, looking at an old family photo. He smiled, then looked at me with meaningful eyes. "Dad, I realize now everything you've had done for me. I isn't just about father and son knit. It's about love and patience. I'm happier in my life," he said sincerely. My heart warmed and I felt relieved. All the struggle, fear, and shame that once surrounded us were gone. My son had understood the meaning of true love and courage, while I felt the results of endless patience. I reached for his hand, patted it gently, and smiled warmly. "Dad's happy too, buddy. Seeing you grow into a brave, wise, and loving person is the greatest gift for Dad." That night, we sat together, just enjoying the meaningful silence. No long words were needed, just each other's presence, just genuine happiness. I wrote in my journal, "Awareness and true happiness are born from shared experiences, from patient love, and from the courage to stay." Today, my son and I realized that our long journey has produced an unbreakable bond. I gazed at the night sky with relief and emotion, certain that tomorrow would come with peace, joy, and an even stronger relationship. That morning, Daniel and I sat on the porch, enjoying the fresh air while sipping hot chocolate. There was a smile on his face I rarely saw before. A smile full of happiness, calm, and "Dad, I want to always remember everything we went through, all the struggles, all the shame. It made me stronger." A sighed softly. My heart raced warmly. I reached for his hand, looked into his eyes, and smiled. "And Dad's always proud of you, buddy. This long journey proves that love and patience can change hearts and build an unbreakable bond, I replied. We sat together in peaceful silence, just enjoying the moment. No overthought words, no worry or fear, just sincere warmth and pure happiness. That night, I wrote in my journal, a father and son journey may be full of challenges, shame, and fear, but with patience, courage, and unconditional love, all can be overcome. Today, I realized our bond is more than just blood. It's born from presence, understanding, and true love. I gazed at the night sky for the last time in this story, smiling faintly, feeling true peace. Our long journey had reached its end happy, genuine, and full of life lessons we would carry forever.